The battleship known today as America's most underrated warship did not begin its life in glory. When it rolled out of the shipyard, no crowd lined the docks, no newspaper printed bold headlines, and no admiral made a triumphant speech. It was simply another hull number, another steel giant among dozens being prepared for a war that was growing larger by the day. From the beginning, this ship carried an invisible burden: timing. It entered service at a moment when the world's attention had already shifted to aircraft carriers. Pearl Harbor had changed everything. Now battleships were seen as outdated, slow, and nearly irrelevant. The public wanted stories about fast carrier strikes, daring fighter pilots, and dramatic dogfights. No one cared about a heavily armored vessel that moved like a floating fortress. But while the spotlight chased aircraft carriers across the Pacific, this battleship quietly prepared for a different kind of work, one that required precision, discipline, and resilience rather than publicity. Its crew was young, many barely 20 years old, yet they trained with the seriousness of men who knew the ocean would not forgive mistakes. During its first months at sea, the ship performed escort missions, guarding convoys and supporting amphibious forces. These operations were crucial, but they were far from glamorous. No newspapers wrote about the nights spent tracking enemy submarines or the long hours spent shelling coastal positions to protect Marines on the ground. These missions saved lives, but they were never mentioned in headlines. Even when the ship entered major battles, it often remained overshadowed. Larger, more famous battleships stole the attention. Carriers dominated every report. And when victories were announced, the public rarely learned how this forgotten titan had provided crucial covering fire, intercepted incoming aircraft, or absorbed enemy shells that would have sunk smaller vessels. Yet, among the sailors who fought beside it, the ship earned a different reputation. They spoke of its steadiness in rough seas, its accuracy under fire, and its remarkable ability to take damage and stay in the fight. In one battle, the ship endured a sudden enemy strike that would have crippled most vessels. Instead, it held the line for hours, protecting an entire task force behind it. Admirals took note. Historians, however, did not. By the end of the war, the battleship had participated in multiple major campaigns, supported landings, destroyed fortifications, rescued downed aviators, and shielded countless ships with its massive guns. But because it never had a single dramatic moment, a single headline-worthy victory, it faded quietly into the background of history. Its story became one of silent contribution, not celebrated heroism. And that is why today, despite everything it accomplished, this battleship remains a forgotten titan, a warship that did everything asked of it, except demand the spotlight. When engineers first sketched the blueprints for this battleship, no one imagined it would one day outperform the very vessels that overshadowed it. In the late 1930s, as tensions grew across the Pacific, American naval architects were tasked with designing a ship that could survive the kind of brutal, close-range fights the Navy feared were coming. They didn't aim for beauty or fame, they aimed for survival. The result was a war machine built with a level of precision that bordered on obsession. The ship's armor was its most defining feature. Instead of spreading protection evenly, designers concentrated thick belts of steel around critical systems, ammunition magazines, engine rooms, and communication centers. It was a simple choice that later saved the ship more than once. Enemy shells that would have turned another battleship into a burning wreck slammed into the armor belt and ricocheted harmlessly into the sea. Below deck, engineers crafted one of the most efficient compartment systems of the era. The ship was divided into dozens of watertight sections, each one capable of being sealed off in seconds. During combat, this design proved essential. When explosions tore through nearby vessels, causing them to flood and capsize, this battleship stayed afloat thanks to meticulous compartmentalization that controlled damage before it spread. But armor and durability were only part of the story. The real surprise came from the ship's firepower. The main guns, enormous, precise, and capable of hitting targets miles away, were mounted on one of the sturdiest turret platforms ever built. Even in heavy seas, the guns could maintain astonishing accuracy. Veterans would later say the ship felt steady, like it wanted to hit its target. Supporting the main battery were dozens of anti-aircraft guns. When the war turned into an air-dominated conflict, this ship adapted faster than expected. It became a floating wall of fire, intercepting enemy aircraft long before they could threaten the fleet. At a time when battleships were dismissed as vulnerable to air power, this one held its ground. Yet, the most underrated feature was the propulsion system. Fitted with powerful boilers and engines that exceeded expectations, the battleship could reach speeds nearly matching some cruisers. This unexpected agility allowed it to reposition quickly during chaotic battles, respond instantly to changing threats, and escort carrier groups far more effectively than originally planned. Time and again, during Pacific operations, the ship proved its worth. In one engagement, it outran an approaching enemy surface group, repositioned behind friendly carriers, and provided crucial defensive fire. In another, it rapidly shifted to support Marines during a fierce coastal assault, delivering accurate bombardments for hours without overheating or slowing. Every performance record, every combat report told the same story. This ship wasn't just well-built, it was overbuilt, a machine created for a kind of war that never fully arrived, yet perfectly suited for the war that actually did. It stood as living proof that great engineering doesn't need applause. It just needs a battlefield. The battleship's first real test came long before anyone expected it. Fresh from the shipyard, still smelling of new paint and hot steel, it was assigned to escort a carrier task force pushing deep into contested waters. Most of the crew had never heard a shot fired in anger. Many officers openly admitted the ship wasn't supposed to see combat this early. But war rarely waits for perfect timing. At dawn on that fateful day, the sky over the Pacific turned from blue to silver as dozens of enemy aircraft appeared on the horizon. They came low, in tight formations, glinting in the rising sun, bombers and torpedo planes, all racing toward the American carriers. Radio operators barked warnings across the fleet. Klaxons screamed. Men scrambled to battle stations. The ship's first moments of war had arrived. The battleship's gunners, drilled relentlessly for months, reacted with a speed that shocked even their commanders. Within seconds, the deck erupted in thunder. Dozens of anti-aircraft guns stitched the sky with tracers, creating a deadly lattice of fire. The ship, so new it hadn't yet fought a storm, was now fighting for the lives of thousands. Enemy pilots expected an easy breakthrough to the carriers. They found a wall instead. The first wave of torpedo bombers swept in from starboard. The battleship's gunners tracked them through clouds of smoke and shrapnel, firing so rapidly the barrels glowed red. One bomber burst into flames and crashed into the sea in a violent spray. Another spiraled down, clipping its wing on the battleship's mast before exploding nearby. Torpedoes dropped early, missing by hundreds of meters. Then the dive bombers came. Screaming down from above the clouds, they targeted anything they could reach. One bomb landed close, far too close, detonating beside the hull and sending a column of water higher than the bridge. For a moment, the ship seemed swallowed by the blast. But as the spray fell away, the battleship emerged, steady and unbroken. Armor plates held, bulkheads held, and the crew held. The calm voice of the captain echoed through the speakers. Maintain fire. Keep the skies clear. And they did. The battleship's main guns, not even intended for anti-aircraft use, joined the defense, firing massive shells that tore the sky apart with shockwaves alone. Pilots later reported feeling the pressure of each blast inside their cockpits. By the time the final wave withdrew, the sea was littered with burning aircraft and drifting wreckage. The carriers' prime targets had taken minimal damage. The task force remained intact. The attack had failed, and much of that failure came down to one battleship that exceeded every expectation. That day changed everything. The ship's captain filed a combat report calling the vessel remarkably stable under fire. Another officer wrote, "She behaves like a veteran despite being fresh from port." Word spread quickly up the chain of command. The Navy realized what it had: a battleship not built for parades or propaganda, but for survival and for victory. For the crew, the transformation was even more profound. They had entered battle unsure, untested, and nervous. They emerged as steel-hardened veterans, bonded by the firestorm they'd endured. And from that day forward, the ship was no longer just a new addition to the fleet. It was a trusted guardian, a shield, a weapon proven worthy in its very first encounter with war. This baptism by fire was complete, and it had passed. Most people imagine a battleship's glory in roaring guns and blazing horizons. But for one American battleship, the unsung titan of the Pacific, its greatest impact came during missions that were never announced, never celebrated, and rarely even recorded. These were the operations where silence mattered more than firepower. In early 1944, weeks before the Big Island assaults began, the ship slipped through moonless waters of the Central Pacific. Her orders were simple but critical: shield the fleet without ever being seen. Enemy submarines were hunting aggressively, and the Japanese Navy relied heavily on night attacks. The battleship's massive radar array and long-range guns turned her into a floating guardian, an invisible wall between danger and the vulnerable troop transports following behind. Many nights, the crew stood at general quarters not because they were firing, but because they were listening. Radar operators tracked faint signals, periscopes slicing the water, unidentified contacts drifting too close. The battleship rarely opened fire, but her presence forced enemy submarines to dive or retreat. Sailors later joked that the ship scared boats away just by being awake. During one mission near the Marshall Islands, a convoy of supply ships found itself exposed after a destroyer suffered engine failure. Instead of abandoning the group, the battleship slowed to match the crippled ship's speed, a dangerous move in enemy-patrolled waters. For 16 tense hours, she screened the convoy alone, her spotters scanning the dark waves for torpedo trails. No medals were awarded. No headlines mentioned it. But those supply ships reached the front lines on time, and thousands of Marines got the ammunition and food they needed. The ship also served as a silent radio shield. Her powerful communication equipment intercepted enemy transmissions, relaying them to intelligence units on nearby islands. On several occasions, this advance warning allowed U.S. forces to avoid ambushes or reposition before Japanese aircraft arrived. Again, nothing glamorous. No footage. Only quiet, critical work. One of the crewmen, decades later, summed it up perfectly. "Everyone remembers the blasts. Nobody remembers the nights we sat there in the dark, making sure no one ever got close enough to make us fire." These hidden missions revealed the battleship's true strength, not just in armor or guns, but in reliability. She was the ship commanders trusted when everything else could go wrong. She didn't need glory. She needed to protect. And she did, time and time again, without a sound. Long after the guns of World War II fell silent, one American battleship, once the pride of her crew, slowly faded into the background of history. She had no flashy nickname, no legendary duel, no Hollywood movie dedicated to her. Yet those who served on her knew she had earned far more recognition than she ever received. Her legacy began quietly. Unlike the Iowa-class giants that drew headlines, this ship rarely appeared in newspapers. But during the war, she was always there, arriving first, leaving last, doing the monotonous, unforgiving work that made every major victory possible. She shelled beaches so Marines could land. She guarded aircraft carriers during their most vulnerable moments. She absorbed enemy fire meant for ships that could not afford to be hit. In the Philippines, she performed one of her most overlooked feats. Caught in a violent typhoon that tore destroyers apart, the battleship held steady, rolling like a mountain refusing to fall. Many sailors later said it felt as if the ship herself fought the storm. Her survival meant the fleet survived, and that the coming operation stayed on schedule. During the Okinawa campaign, the bloodiest island assault of the Pacific, her big guns fired day and night. She supported trapped units, silenced hidden artillery, and intercepted kamikaze aircraft with a hurricane of anti-aircraft fire. But her role was overshadowed by newer ships and larger headlines. She never asked for the spotlight. She simply did the job. When the war ended, she carried home thousands of exhausted servicemen, men who had seen death, fire, and fear up close. To them, the battleship was more than steel. She was a sanctuary, a promise that they would make it home alive. Many wrote letters saying they owed their life to the ship that never quit. Yet, despite this record of service, she was quietly retired, then removed from duty altogether. Other battleships were preserved as museums, symbols of American strength. But she was left out, remembered only in scattered photographs and fading diaries. Still, her legacy endures in ways history books rarely capture. Every Marine whose landing she protected, every pilot whose carrier she defended, every convoy that reached its destination because she shielded it, each one carried a piece of her story forward. She may not stand today as a floating monument, but she lives on in the victories she made possible. One veteran said it best during a reunion decades later. People talk about the famous ships, but the one that saved my life, they forgot her name. I never did. The battleship deserved more recognition, more honor, more memory. But perhaps her greatest legacy is the quiet truth that she never needed fame. She was built to serve. She did her duty, and in doing so, she became one of the war's greatest warriors, forgotten by history, but unforgettable to those she protected.